It's good to see you all. Thank you for coming. Welcome, welcome. Well, this is the third and closing in our summer series, our summer book club. And tonight we're going to look at a very wonderful book about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But before that, a couple of announcements and commercials. I'm delighted everybody's here. We start the high holiday season very soon. This is the time of year when people in my business become moon worshipers, you know, because I can look at the moon and tell you how many days I have before the holidays start. Not this weekend, but next weekend is Selichot. Saturday night is the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, and the custom is to gather late in the evening for an evening of prayer and meditation. And this year we're going to do Selichot in the Sephardic tradition. It's going to be led by our artist in residence, Halevi, with his wonderful music. And to prepare us for that, our guest next Saturday night, our guest teacher, is Professor Sarah Stein, who's the Amato Professor of Jewish History at UCLA. And she is an expert in Jews of the Ottoman Empire, the Sephardic tradition of the Eastern Mediterranean. And she's going to tell us a wonderful sort of mystery story about the person who's most responsible for the liturgical, the prayer life of Jews of the Ottoman Empire. So she's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Mark's shaking his head because he studied with her, right? Really? Yes. Yes, well, Mark is actually our resident historian. There you go. Wonderful. She has great taste in teachers, right? Anyway, Sarah will be our guest. She's taught here before. A lovely, lovely person. And I don't have the time schedule. It's on the brochure, but whatever it is, we'll learn with Sarah. We'll take a break. We'll make Havdalah. We'll have some ice cream. It's also a Jewish tradition here at VBS. And then we'll proceed to the Slichot prayers, which will be offered with the beautiful music of the Sephardic tradition. So join us next Saturday night for that. And then the following, I think it's Wednesday night. I think it's the following Wednesday night. We're having an evening just of Yontif preparation to get ready for the holiday. And our guests will be Rabbi Mark Borowitz of Beit Tshuva. Of course, he's been here many, many times before. And Mark will be helping me teach all about the whole notion of what it means to do tshuva, to change one's whole pattern of living. That is the purpose of the high holiday season. And then the high holiday season begins 2 weeks from Sunday. Okay, so you should be getting tickets in the mail and brochures and time schedules and all sorts of wonderful things helping you get ready. If anybody is not a member of the synagogue and would like to be here for the holidays, we'd be delighted to have you. Shirley will be here to welcome you. You just need to call the office and tell them you'd like to come, and we'll work that out. You can either join the shul, that's the cheaper way to do it, or if you just want to buy some tickets, help us out with that. You can do that as well. And we'd love to have you. It's the only time of the year we have tickets, and that's largely for security and crowd control. If anybody can't afford it for any reason whatsoever, just let the people in the office know that, and they'll make it possible for you to be here. Money's not the reason not to come to shul. There's a lot of good reasons not to come to shul, but money isn't one of them, right? So come in and enjoy the holidays at Valley Beth Shalom. We'd love to have you. And so we'll have Rosh Hashanah. It'll be Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday. And then we're going to do Tashlich. And of course, in our shul, we do Tashlich at Lake Balboa, and we feed the ducks, which you're not allowed to do the rest of the year. And we do a very special blessing for the dogs. I don't know why. People started bringing their dogs to Tashlich, so we decided to make that a dog holiday. So it's actually called Tashlish. And if your dog is of age, we'll do a bar mitzvah, right? So, I know. I can keep going. K9 Ahara. I mean, you can keep going. But please come and join us for those. That's what we'll be celebrating this year. Okay? And then after that, there's Yom Kippur, and we go on with the holiday season. All right. This evening, we're going to take a look at a wonderful book called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor. It's a very short book. It really, literally is an hour's read. If you're slow like me, it'll 2 hours read. But it's an hour's read. But it is, I think, a very profound statement. And I'll tell you at the outset why I think it's profound, and then we'll go through some of his insights and his arguments. Yossi Klein Halevi is an American-born Jewish fellow, born in New York and raised in New York. He was, as a young man, part of the Jewish Defense League, a follower of America Hana, a very radical right-wing lunatic. And then he made Aliyah to Israel, I think in 1970. He and I are the same age. He made Aliyah to Israel, joined the Israeli army, served in the Israeli army, settled in Jerusalem. 1980? 82, fine. Yeah, he joined the Israeli army, served in the army, then settles in Jerusalem, became a journalist, and has been living there ever since, teaching in a variety of places, and currently affiliated with the Hartman Institute, where I am as well. And his politics has become very, well, it depends on how you look at it, either very mixed up or very clear, depending on how you look at it, because he's become very balanced. And we'll see that in the course of his writing. A very, very wise, deep, thoughtful, insightful speaker and teacher. Does a lot of speaking around the country and publishes in many different places, including the New York Times and the LA Times and lots of magazines and journals. The principal feeling you'll get from reading this book is something that's very, very rare when you read anything about the Israeli-Arab conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian struggle. This book is hopeful. This book really is a testament to one Jew's hope. Now, you don't hear that very often in the course of these conversations. When you talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian struggle, you hear a lot of rage, you hear a lot of passion. People will tell you without any prompting whatsoever why we're right and they're wrong. And why if anyone disagrees with us, it's something wrong with them. They're hateful. You use lots of invectives, lots of damning invectives, apartheid state on the one hand, or Nazi anti-Semite on the other hand. There's a great deal of that kind of invective thrown into the conversation. Very rarely do you hear anybody say, tell me your story. Tell me your side. I want to hear your side of the story. I want to hear both sides of the story. I want to hear the narratives that govern this conflict. And that really is what Yossi begins with in this book. He lives in Jerusalem, and he lives in the neighborhood called French Hill. Anybody happen to know where that is? It's right, it's Givat Tarfati, right. It's right across the street from Mount Scopus. And he happens to live in the apartment block that is the last block in French Hill. So that, what? So that from his living room or his porch, he has a little patio, you can see a number of Arab villages on the nearby hillsides. They're not very far away, by the way. They're very close. I mean, the villages have grown, and French Hill has grown, so the Arab villages and the Jewish settlement of Jerusalem has come very close physically together. So sitting in his porch and listening to the celebrations, like the wedding celebrations in the nearby Arab village, or listening to the prayer services on Friday mosque, or listening to just the sounds of life in the village nearby, it occurs to him that the people in that village and the people who live in his neighborhood live in very close physical proximity, but very distant cultural separation. There is a wall between them now, this security wall that either protects the Jewish areas of Israel, right, or isolates the Arab, depending on how you look at it. But there's very little conversation over that wall. And what you get are the narratives that Jews tell each other and the narratives that Arabs tell each other, but very little conversation between the two. And therefore, what the politics of this conflict have come to represent is a hardening of positions on both sides with very little softening conversation across the wall. The Israeli government has become more and more right-wing in its position. Right-wing meaning it wants nothing to do with the Arabs, wants to reiterate the narrative that they're either not there or shouldn't be there. And the Arab or Palestinian narrative is that the Jews have no right to be here. And there's very little conversation going on across the wall. And sitting on his porch, overlooking these Arab villages, it suddenly occurs to Yossi that there's something like dreadfully wrong with this. That you're never going to have any steps toward any kind of peace, of any kind, unless we begin to talk to each other. And the basic thesis of this book is that the fundamental problem between Arabs and Jews, between Israelis and Palestinians, is not territorial. Who lives in one part of the land and who lives in another part of the land. The fundamental problem is narrative. Now, the word narrative is used very frequently in social science, humanities these days. Narrative is the story that I tell, which identifies me. Israeli Jews have a narrative that we tell about who we are, what our relationship is to this land, why this land matters to us, how we got to this land, how we declared independence and created a sovereign state in this land, and why we have a right to hold on to it. And Arab Palestinians have their narrative about who they are, what their relationship is to the land, and what their future vision of the land is. And these two narratives are really very different. And the only way that you're ever going to have any kind of reconciliation or any kind of peace is if we can at least listen to each other's narratives and not accept, but at least hear each other's narratives. The most egregious symbol of the difference between the narratives is that Jews will celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, the happiest day of the year is Israel Independence Day, when we celebrate the fact that after millennia, thousands of years of Jewish homelessness, the Jewish people have returned to our homeland and established a Jewish state whose purpose it is to protect Jewish life in the world, something we couldn't do for 2,000 years. And so we celebrate with great joy and celebration Yom Ha'atzmaut, and on the very same day, the Arab Palestinian population celebrates, or rather commemorates, a day they called Nakba. Nakba means the disaster. The disaster and the catastrophe of the land stolen from them, taken from them, their dispossession and disempowerment in that part of the world. Now, when you have one day that represents such diametric opposite valences, moral valences to two different populations, you can see why the problem is so intractable. But the first thing you got to do is listen to each other. You have to listen to each other, and that's the purpose of this book. What he does is he writes a series of letters. It's about 6 letters to his Palestinian neighbor, so that the Palestinian neighbor might hear a Jewish narrative from the inside. And by the way, what Yossi then did was, he had this book translated into Arabic, and it's up online for free. If you want to buy it in English, it costs you, whoa, that's how much it costs? It costs $25 or $20, again on Amazon, it's $18 in English, but if you can read Arabic, it's free. He put the Arabic version of the book up online for free, so that any Arab in the Arab world can read this book. Now, the question is any Arab in the Arab world ever going to read this book? That's another question. But that's at least his hope. And what he's hoping is that somebody on the other side will write their own version of this book, Letters to My Israeli Neighbor, and you'll actually begin a dialogue. And that's where we start from. Okay? Yeah, a question. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Arabs have, and I'm not discounting anything you say.
I haven't said anything yet. I've just told you what the book said. Yeah.
But Arabs have a tremendous amount of land
Yeah.
in that region of the world.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure is such a disaster to them when they have many
Okay, so
of the
so that brings us to the very first statement. So what I did was I copied for you a dozen or so statements from the book, which I think take us through as an outline some of the arguments that Yossi offers in the book. And Erica is raising the very first one, and I think it goes perfectly with Yossi's answer. So here's Yossi's answer. And let me tell you what the question is, and then we'll read the answer, okay? When you start this conversation with anybody who has a stake in this, especially anyone who's deeply passionate about this, and I'm not criticizing what you said. What you said was perfectly fine. The first thing that happens is people say, gee, I don't understand why the other side has anything to say about this whatsoever. Right? So from an Israeli point of view, they say, look, you have Muslim countries that stretch from Morocco to Indonesia. You have Arab countries that cover hundreds of thousands of square miles. Why won't they just go away and let us have this little teeny sliver of land? I'm stating an exaggerated version of what you just asked. I'm not making. And the Arab, the Palestinian will say to you, we lived in this land for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. You people show up 70 years ago, put a stake in the ground and say, it's ours, get out. What right do you have? You see, this is the first thing. So the first thing Yossi says, don't argue with me, just listen. For many years, we in Israel ignored you, treated you as invisible, transparent. He's talking to his Palestinian neighbor. Just as the Arab world denied the right of the Jews to define themselves as a people deserving national sovereignty, so we denied the Palestinians the right to define themselves as a distinct people within the Arab nation, and likewise deserving national sovereignty. In other words, one of the moves that people make when they begin talking about this is simply to erase the other side. Erase the other side. And Yossi begins by saying, that's not going to get us anywhere. Because we both exist. You exist and I exist. And you exist with your own internal narrative, and I exist with my own internal narrative. And the only way to even begin a conversation is to solve our conflict. We must recognize not only each other's right to self-determination, that is, our right to a country where we can have a culture, but also each side's right to self-definition. You can't tell me, you, an Arab, can't tell me as a Jew that I'm just a religion and not a people, and therefore undeserving of a country. And I, as a Jew, can't tell you as an Arab, there's really no such thing as Palestinians. You're all just one diffuse Arab people. Why don't you go live in another Arab country? You can't tell another person you don't exist. The very first step in any kind of reconciliation is to recognize the existence of the other, to realize the existence of the other, and at least to acknowledge that the other has a right to define themselves in the way they want to define themselves. Let's take an analogy just for a moment, a very different analogy from a very different worldview. A different worldview, right? If a woman says, I was sexually harassed by my boss, right? And the boss says, right, who are you? You're not going to have a conversation. Right? It's not until the boss recognizes that the woman who works for him is actually a human being and has a definition and a sensibility that you're ever going to have even a conversation. So the first thing to recognize is there are Palestinians, and they define themselves as Palestinians. And they're Jews, and they define themselves as Jews. And both sides claim, and both claims are legitimate to an extent, a place in this land. At least let's hear the other side say that. Because the moment you say to the other side, well, you really don't belong here, you have no conversation. Oh yeah? Bam! That's how you end up with a war. So that's the beginning. So what he's doing, as I said, is a hopeful book. Because what he's doing by writing to his Palestinian neighbor is to say, I recognize you as a Palestinian. I recognize you as a legitimate nation, a nation with interests, a nation that's defined itself as resident in this place. I hope that you'll recognize me the same way. Now let's talk. Now let's talk. Okay? Yes, please.
That was very right to say when they were not the attackers,
Yeah.
they lost the war,
Yeah.
and they were the Arabs,
Yeah.
the Palestinians
Yeah.
that attacked Israel.
Yeah, yeah.
So they are all Arabs.
Yeah.
And they are not the number that they were when Israel.
I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong here. I know.
Because the land is promised.
Okay, but you can't close your eyes and say they don't belong here, they shouldn't be here. Let's push them out.
I didn't say that.
I know that. I know that.
Mexicans don't say, this is our land, and it's 5 states of the United States where.
Shh! Don't say that so loud.
It is.
Don't say that so loud. They're going to say it one day. Wait, it's coming. Okay, all right.
The Americans are the power
Okay.
over the other.
Wait, one at a time. One at a time.
You lose the war.
Yeah.
And you started the war.
Okay.
You get the consequences. This is it.
Yes, but now you have 3.5 million people living there. What do you want to do with them?
No, they have to recognize Israel and to live in peace in Israel.
Oh.
Are they?
Will you make them citizens?
Yes.
Yeah, they'll vote. Wait, no, they'll vote.
Arabs that
Wait. They'll vote, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now you have 7 million Jews and 3.5 million Arabs voting for the Knesset. Is that what you want? No. I want to know what you want.
Exactly that.
Well, no, that's exactly what you just said. All right, hang on. Wait, shh. Let's look at Yossi's next comment. Ready? Right. So he's explaining him. The first move he's going to make is to explain himself to the other side. Okay? In culture, in political dialogue, I was just overseas, and outside of the United States and Israel, the word Zionism is considered a filthy word. I was in England. I was in London. I don't know if you've been to London, but there are certain neighborhoods of London that you can speak Arabic and not speak English. The word Zionism in Europe is considered a horrible thing. So the first thing he wants to explain is what is Zionism and why it's a legitimate word. It's a legitimate movement. So he says, if by Zionism one means the Jewish attachment to the land of Israel and the dream of renewing Jewish sovereignty in our place of origin, then there is no Judaism without Zionism. What he's trying to say is that the land of Israel has been part of Jewish identity since the very beginning of the Jewish people. There has been no time in Jewish history when there was a Judaism without some relationship to the land. There were some movements, for example, the German Reform movement and the early American Reform movement, that tried to define Judaism without a relationship to the land, but they're gone. They disappeared very quickly. The land has always been part of the dream of the Jewish people, and therefore, when Jews began to return in large numbers to Eretz Yisrael in at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, they weren't coming as invaders or crusaders. The Crusaders came during the Middle Ages to retake the Holy Land from the infidel, right? The invaders came, the Turks came, for example, in the 16th century. But they came to conquer another land. Colonialists come to conquer another land, right? When the Belgians went to the Congo, or the Dutch went to Indonesia, when the British and the French and the Spanish came to the Americas, they came as conquistadors to conquer this land. Jews never came to conquer the land. Jews were returning home. And they never considered this a land that was just to be conquered, to be colonialized. One of the accusations of the world, basically, against Israel is that it's a colonial power. But that was never the intention, nor does it fit the structure of the experience of Zionism. Because Judaism has always had a relationship to this land, and our returning to the land at the end of the 19th, early 20th century was not for the purpose of exploiting it the way colonialists exploit a land that they conquer. It was to return home and build the land, which is exactly what they did. So he says, really, there's no way to imagine Judaism without a relationship to this land. And that's why you can't be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic. Because Zionism, as a return to the land, is an integral part of the Jewish dream, of Jewish identity. Judaism isn't only a set of rituals and rules, but a vision linked to a place. Modern movements that created forms of Judaism, severed from the love of the land and the dream of return, all ended in failure. Now, what he's referring to here is an important argument that comes up frequently. Part of the propaganda of the Palestinian national movement is to claim that Jews, number one, never lived in the land, never had a relationship to this land, never had a residence in this land, and number two, that Judaism is a religion. And as a religion, it doesn't deserve to be treated the way that you treat a nation. Nations are entitled to what we call self-determination. But why does a religion need a land? So the Palestinian argument goes something like this. It says, this is a religion, and what the Zionists did was pervert and twist Jewish religion to cover up a colonial effort by Europeans to steal a land from native peoples. That this was a way of stealing a land by creating a phony peoplehood and a phony national movement. And therefore, they have no right, the Jews have no right to this land. So Yossi says as follows: over the years, I've repeatedly heard variation of the following from Palestinians and Muslims generally. They will say, we have no problem with Jews as a religion. We treated you better than the Christians did. But we have no sympathy for your insistence that you are a people with right to national sovereignty, because we know that you aren't a people but a religion. Here's his answer. The denial of Jewish peoplehood is one of the key divides between us. Even Palestinian moderates I've known, who want to end the bloodshed, tend to deny that the Jews are an authentic nation. So long as Palestinian leaders insist on defining the Jews as a religion, rather than allowing us to define ourselves, as we have since ancient times, as a people with a particular faith, then Israel will continue to be seen as illegitimate, its existence an open question. So you see two levels of this. Number one, this is the fulfillment of what he said in the first section, which is that if you're going to have any kind of conversation, you've got to let the other side have the right of self-definition. You've got to let the other side define themselves. You can't tell me what I am. You've got to let me tell you what I am. You've got to listen to me as I tell you what I am. For Arabs to tell Jews, you're not really a people, you're just a religion, and you have no right to the land, that violates my right to self-definition, and it also violates my own sense of my history and my identity. But there's another layer of this which is more subtle. He's not here talking only to his Palestinian neighbor. He's talking to his Israeli children. He's talking to Jewish children worldwide who have joined the anti-Israel movements because for them, they have bought this idea that Judaism is just a religion and that it has been twisted and perverted to cover up a colonial movement to steal a land from an indigenous people. Now, the analogy is that what white Europeans did to the Native Americans, that's what Zionists did to the Palestinians. That's the analogy that's being offered. And Yossi comes back and says, no, that's not the right analogy, and that's not what happens at all. First of all, we Jews are not just a religion. We are, and here's the next paragraph, we are a people with a faith. But we have always defined ourselves as a people first. For Judaism, peoplehood has a crucial spiritual dimension. The Jewish collective functions on two levels, as family and as faith. What strengthened the Jewish family was its sense of destiny. The Jewish people has an urgent spiritual role to play in the evolution of humanity. Destiny gives meaning to fate. We have always seen ourselves as a people, but a people with a faith and with a deep sense of our historic destiny, or historic destiny, our mission in the world. And he's trying to also talk to his own kids who don't understand why you're clinging to this land so tenaciously. And he's trying to help them understand that we've always seen ourselves as a people, and we've always seen ourselves as a people with a particular mission. And that this becomes the justification for returning home to the land that has always been defined as ours. So it's a two-way conversation. He's talking to his Palestinian neighbor, but he's also talking to his own kids. He's also talking to his own children, or the generation of his own children. Okay? I see there's a lot of people that have comments. Yeah, and hang on just a second. Wait 1 second. Let's start. Someone hasn't talked yet. Yeah. Yeah, that was my Tisha B'Av lecture about a month ago. It was brilliant, just brilliant. You can watch it online. It's up online. Yes. Well, the question is this. It's a very good question. Can the destiny be abused? Okay. The real question is, it depends on how you define the historic mission of the Jewish people, okay? He says here, right, that the Jewish people have an urgent spiritual role to play in the evolution of humanity. And I would agree with him. That's a really nice way of putting it, right? There are other people who would put it in different terms, in terms of more chauvinistic terms, in terms of, we're the elect and we're allowed to do certain things, right? So it's a question really of how you define the historic mission of the Jewish people. That's number one. Number two is, it's a great question. If we have this sense of our peoplehood, right, why are we always fighting with each other? I mean, what kind of strange peoplehood is it that leaves people without any kind of sense of solidarity? And that's when you talk about the Tisha B'Av story, which is what you're referring to. So the rabbis of the Talmud, when they reflected on the destruction of the temple in 70 and our exile, said the reason we were sent into exile was because of sinat chinam, which means boundless hatred, hatred with no limits, okay? And it's self-hatred. It's hatred of, it's an inability of this people to gather together and protect its own interests, an inability to find common cause, an inability to accept leadership, which is a sort of problem with Jews. I don't know if you know this, but Jews are often disagreeable. Right? You're supposed to say, no, they're not. Go ahead, say it. And this becomes a very interesting set of issues, right? What he's trying to do to say to his kids, though, and I think you have to hear the argument to his children just as important to him as the argument to the Palestinian neighbor, is that we are a people. Now, that idea of peoplehood is a very interesting idea, and it's in some ways a controversial idea, because if it's a peoplehood and it has a sense of responsibility to the whole world, right, then the tendency, the temptation is to give up the peoplehood and become a universalist, right? Why do I have to remain a Jew? Remember, there was a famous Jewish socialist named Rosa Luxemburg who basically hated herself as a Jew because she thought that anything Jewish detracted from her love of all of humanity. And it was the Dalai Lama who once made a brilliant comment. He says, I travel the world and I meet college students. And if a student says to me, I'm a Christian, I say, he's a Christian. And if the student says to me, I'm a Muslim, he's a Muslim. And if the student says to me, I'm a Buddhist, he says, he's a Buddhist. And if the student says to me, I embrace all faiths, that's a Jew. No, it's because if you teach your kids that we are responsible for tikkun olam, for the repair of the whole world, that we are responsible to bring a set of ethics to all of humanity, then the question is then what is my relationship to my own particularity, to my own people? Why should I be loyal to my own people? Well, no, they're not. But you see the temptation is to move in that direction. And so Yossi's trying to say, don't give up on this idea of peoplehood. Because basically, Zionism is rooted in a sense of peoplehood. If you ask me, why do you need a Jewish country? The first question is you have to acknowledge there's such thing as the Jewish people. You see where he's going with this? And if you talk to kids, and I do, because I get out a lot, not as much as I'd like to, but I get out a lot, and I talk to kids who are in the various kinds of left-wing organizations. And what you hear there is this, I'm more concerned about the fate of the Palestinian than my own people's fate. They give up the sense of peoplehood, and with the waning of a sense of peoplehood comes a waning of a sense of Zionism. And that's what he's concerned about here. You wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I disagree with your presentation of the Palestinian people.
Okay.
It's not just Arabs. Palestine was just a geographical name of the area.
All right, now, what do you do with a person who stands in front of you and says, I am a proud Palestinian? You're going to say to him, you don't exist, or your people who don't exist, or your identity doesn't exist?
No, because
What do you say to that person?
he identifies himself
As-
with the geography where his ancestors.
He says, I am a member of the Palestinian people. We have our distinct culture. We have a distinct identity. We have a distinct place in the world. And you say to him, what? You don't exist?
No, it's not about existence because Palestinian culture is actually what you're referring to is Arab culture.
Okay, so what if I said to you, you're a Jew? You don't exist. There's no such thing as Jews. There were Jews in the Bible, but after the Bible, Jews stopped existing because their temple was destroyed. Jew means Judean. You don't live in Judea. You live in California. You don't exist. How do you feel about that? Does that make you feel uncomfortable if I say your identity doesn't exist? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Does it? Yes or no? No. Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Then okay, then you're honest.
Palestine was a place for Jews.
You didn't answer my question. You didn't answer my question. If you say to a people, your identity doesn't exist,
I never said that.
you did. You just told a Palestinian that there's no such thing as a Palestinian people.
Arab culture, Arab language.
Right. No, you're wrong. You're dead wrong, because there are people who say, I am a Palestinian. Now, if you want to say, you don't exist, that person's going to say, fine. You and I can never have a conversation. Now our relationship is war. But if you ever want to make peace with that person, ever, the first step is to say, you have an identity that you've defined, and I have an identity that I've defined. I accept your identity, you accept my identity. Now let's settle the problems between us. But if you say to somebody, your people don't exist, that person's going to be upset. I would be upset if I did, by the way. I go and speak to lots of different groups, right? So I'm speaking to a very fundamentalist Christian group. And a guy gets up and says exactly that. He says, you Jews don't exist. After Jesus Christ, there's no such thing as the Jewish people. We're Israel. I got very upset. And what do you mean? What am I, chopped liver? You see, the problem is you may be right, except that's never going to lead to peace. It's only going to lead to further endless bloodshed and war, because people will fight to the death to protect their identity, right? I see lots of comments, and I haven't even gotten halfway through the page. All right, yes, sir.
When the British Empire was there,
Yeah.
they never, as soon as Israel became a state, they started complaining. Why didn't they did something when the British Empire was there? They were with the British. They didn't claim nothing. Actually, what happened to the Arabs when the king, the brother of King Hussein from Saudi Arabia, ask the Arabs, mercenaries, they want to come and help them kick the Turks out of the Middle East.
Yeah,
They were with the Arabs.
right.
So here Israel became a state. They're complaining. Why didn't they did something? It's their country, Palestine, when the British were there.
Right. Right. Well,
You know, I want to know why they said nothing is their country when British were there.
they did. In 1937, there was a commission that came up with the idea of the partition of the land because there was an Arab population and a Jewish population. In 1947, the United Nations adopted the same idea. This idea that there are two people sharing the land. Yes, I know. You're right.
They're out of it.
Yeah, well, but now what do you do? Now what do you do? If you're sitting in Yossi, Klein Halevi's patio, and you're looking over 2, 3, 4 Arab villages, do you say to yourself, listen, I'm right, they're wrong, we're just going to have to fight about this for the next 100 years. If you want to fight, if you want to keep insisting that you're right, if you want to win the argument and keep insisting that you're right and they're wrong, what you're saying is we will have endless war. If you ever imagine that we can have some kind of peace, if you want to imagine we can have some kind of peace, the first step to some kind of peace is to say, okay, let's now talk. You can have your identity and I can have mine. And let's not let the events of the past imprison us. Let's move in a direction where we can actually reconcile. And at least we don't have to like each other. We just have to stop killing each other. Right? And that's what he's trying to do in this book. Look at the next line. There may be no way to bridge our opposing narratives about the founding of Israel. This is at the end of a long chapter which talks about what you just said. The fact that the Arab world rejected the United Nations partition plan in 1947 and initiated a war, and that war yielded a Jewish state, okay? It yielded a Jewish state, and that gives us Yom HaAtzmaut on the Jewish side and Nakba on the Palestinian side. It also yielded a certain number of refugees. Now, the Jews claim that they didn't actually dispossess those refugees. Those refugees left because they were promised that the Jews would get slaughtered and they could come back and live in their houses. And the Arabs claim that the Jews dispossessed them. And the historians now have taken a look at this and discovered that everybody's right. All of these things happened. Jews did dispossess Arabs. Arabs did leave because they were told they would have their land. And that's where you ended up with the refugee problem. And the Arab world exploited Palestinian refugees and continues to do so to this very day as a propaganda tool, and the misery of those refugees as a propaganda tool against Israel. Now, having said all that, we have two very different stories about the founding of Israel. Even as we seek a two-state solution, we will likely remain with a two-narrative problem. You'll have your story, and we'll have our story. And the stories are different. They have who's a hero to us is a villain to you. Okay? What's a triumph to us is a tragedy to you. What is a great military victory for us is a slaughter to you. We're going to have two narratives, right? But that historical divide must not prevent a political compromise. I'm going to ask you whether this is possible in a minute. I honor history up to a point where it no longer inspires but imprisons. Accommodating both our narratives, learning to live with contradictory stories, is the only way to deny the past a veto over the future. We live in such intimacy, we can almost hear each other breathing. What choice do we have but to share the land? And by that I mean conceptually as well as tangibly. We must learn to accommodate each other's narratives. Now, here's the question. What he's saying is, you have to make up your mind what you want. Do you want to be right, or do you want to stop killing each other? If being right is what's important to you, then what you're saying is, then all we're going to do is keep on fighting. But at a certain point, you've got to say, listen, He's got his story, and I have my story. And we're not going to meet in the middle, but we can let go of those stories and establish some kind of rapprochement and move on. Okay, I'll just give you two quick analogies. I was just in South Africa. That's where I was this summer. There's a very major Jewish learning festival called Limud, and they have Limud South Africa. So they invite a small group of international Jewish scholars to come and teach them. And they invited Nina and me to fly all the way to South Africa, and we taught in Johannesburg, and we taught in Durban, and we taught in Cape Town, and we spent a lot of time with the communities there. And South Africa is a country trying to do this too, because you have two populations at odds with each other, trying to figure out what do you do with a very painful history. The history of apartheid was a very, very, very painful history. There's a magnificent museum in Johannesburg called the Apartheid Museum, which is basically Yad Vashem, if you know what that means, for South Africa. It gives you a sense of what they did. And at the end of the museum, there's an exhibit about Nelson Mandela, who this year celebrates his 100th birthday. And what Mandela did was he came out of prison after 27 years on Robben Island prison, and he didn't say what everybody in the world expected him to say. Everybody in the world expected him to say, you have oppressed us, you have tortured us, you have imprisoned us, you have dispossessed us, let's kill all the white people. Understand that South Africa is 49 million people, 8 million whites and 41 million blacks. They call them blacks there because they're not African Americans, they're blacks because they're Africans. They speak Zulu. He could have said that, and everybody expected him to say that, and he didn't. He came out of prison and said, we are one nation. We have to figure out how to live together. Now, in order to do that, you've got to come to terms with what happened. So they had a process called Truth and Reconciliation, which goes on to this day. I don't know if you read the president's tweet today, but there is one of the issues going on today in South Africa is something called land reform. When the settlers came, when European settlers came to South Africa a century ago, they took away the land that belonged to the tribes that lived there. Well, the current South African government is trying to figure out a legal method of giving those tribes back their lands. Okay? It's a very difficult process, okay? So they're trying to figure out how do you do that in a just and legal way. But the question is, do I let the past imprison me? Do I let the past define me? Do I keep saying to the other, you did this? Or at some point, do you let it go? And you say, we both have stories of pain. We both have stories of tragedy. We both have experienced terrible injustices. We're going to have to acknowledge that and put it aside if we're ever going to live together. So the choice here is either to be right or to have peace. You can't have both. If you want to be right, you'll continue to have war. If you want to have peace, hang on, let's just explain Yossi's comment here. You have to acknowledge the history, but you have to let it go and move on. Otherwise, you're never going to, and I've had this conversation, I've been on college campuses, and immediately you go back into but you did this, right? It's a very, very interesting question of whether you can ever do that. In South Africa, the jury's still out. They're still fighting over this. It's a serious issue whether South Africa can actually do this. And by the way, just one other analogy, just so that you can make it closer to home. I don't know how many of you have ever been in the southern United States. Alabama, Mississippi. I lived in Texas for a while. I don't know if many of you know this, but the Civil War did not end in 1865. It's still going on. Right? And I'm not kidding. The Civil War is still going on. The South never accepted the fact that they lost the Civil War. Well, they don't call it the Civil War. They call it either the war between the states, if they're being generous, or the war of northern aggression, if they're being, snarky. So much of the politics and the race issues that this country faces is stuff left over from a war that we were supposed to have finished more than 100 years ago, and we haven't finished it yet. It's still going on. All right, Douglas.
I wrote to Yossi after I finished the book.
Good.
I never got a response.
Well, he's very
And-
expensive. So.
And it had to do with the
He's a very,
issue
very
of,
good
it
guy,
had to
but
do
he's
with the
busy.
issue of dueling histories.
Okay, yeah.
And my problem with dueling histories is that the same thing. When you study the Civil War, you do not study the War of Northern Aggression. You just study what happened. We have had Israeli historians who have challenged the narrative that I was told as a child about voluntary leaving of creating refugees. There has never, ever been a Palestinian historian that has ever challenged their narrative to come to grips with any element of the legitimacy of the Jewish story. Now, maybe this book is an invitation for somebody to do so, but I think that if you're going to start with peace, and this is the thing I had with Yossi that is a problem with me, you're going to have to find a Palestinian Benny Morris to challenge their history and sit there and say that it wasn't just what the Jews did to us. Read Mahmoud Abbas's op-ed in the New York Times on the 70th anniversary, and what you get is a complete fabrication and distortion of history, which is based upon he's cherry-picking some accurate facts.
No.
There were expulsions, there were massacres, but
There have been Palestinian scholars, journalists, and teachers. We had the guy here, Abu Tomer.
and he's viewed as a turncoat. Who is
Well,
a
of course
serious?
they're going to be. So was Benny Morris.
No, he isn't.
Oh, sure he was.
He was.
When Benny Morris published his book,
And
with
now
the
he's viewed as the
revision-
gold standard of history.
Yeah, because he changed his mind after the Intifada and he changed the narrative back.
He never changed the narrative about what happened in terms of
But
displacement
he changed
and
his
massacre.
politics significantly.
But what
There
he
have
did-
been, Douglas, let's acknowledge, you're right. You have not had the kind of revisionist history of the Palestinian narrative that you've had on the Israeli side. That's no question. But it's not correct to say there has been nobody who's told that story. There have been people who have, someone's calling, there have been people who have told that story, and there are people telling that story, right? There are some issues, though. One of the issues is you can afford to do revisionist history, when you're on top. It's much harder to do revisionist history when you're a struggling minority, right? When you're a revolutionary movement, right? Give the Palestinians 100 years of independence and you'll get revisionist history, right? You gotta let this thing evolve for a while. I mean, that's part of the problem. But there have been people who have challenged it, right? Then you have the radicalization of politics on the West Bank, and particularly in Gaza, where if you object to the narrative, they basically kill you. Abu Tomer lives on our side of the border for a reason, right? It's a dangerous place. Look, here's what Yossi's saying. I don't think he would disagree with you, right? I don't think he would disagree with you. But what you're saying then is there'll never be peace. There'll never be peace because there will never be an effort on both sides to listen to the narrative. There'll be a Jewish effort to listen to the narrative of the other. But there won't be a Palestinian effort to listen to the narrative of the other. And until there is, you're never going to have peace. And you may be right. And that's one of the reasons why this book has been criticized as sort of naive. Because it seems, what he's asking for is kind of impossible. But, if you're sitting there and you have kids in the army in Israel, and he does, and I have friends who do.
So do I.
And you say to yourself, so do you, right? Is your daughter there now?
No, but the girl who was our exchange
But wait,
student.
let me just finish the statement. If you put you can't help. You can't help but try to imagine, in some sense, what it might take to find a resolution to this problem. And that's what he's doing here. Now, you can say, this is impossible, this is impractical, this is unworkable, this is dreaming, this is an American guy who doesn't understand the hardcore reality of Middle Eastern politics, and all of that's been said about this book in the reviews, all of that. But you can't help but admire the fact that the guy is saying, look, I refuse to give up all hope.
You and I have had this conversation before,
yeah.
where I have said that peace is dependent on both sides, recognizing
Right.
both the legitimacy
Right,
and the
right, right,
permanence
right.
of the other side.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what you've got is at least a step forward on the Jewish side to recognize the other side's legitimacy.
Yeah.
I have yet to see that on the Palestinian side.
Well,
And until that,
I've
we're
heard
just
it.
kind of spitting in the wind.
I've heard it, I've seen it, and I've heard it. It exists on the Palestinian side.
It's
Right?
very
It's
silent.
It's not published a lot. It's not published a lot. Yeah. Yeah, there are. There are a lot of, first of all, a lot of community grassroots organizations that are working across the border, right? The Palestinian Authority itself, despite Abbas's editorial, the Palestinian Authority itself is working very, very closely with the Israeli security agencies to ensure, to take care of security, right? And there's, the Palestinian Authority itself is doing a lot of this because there is a recognition among many, not all, of the leaders of the Palestinian side in the West Bank, not in Gaza, in the West Bank, that Israel's not going anywhere and that it's a fruitless thing to carry on a 1,000-year conflict. It's going to destroy the society. And so there is an effort on the Palestinian side not to say we accept your narrative, but at least to say, listen, you're not going anywhere. We might as well make our peace and live with you under the conditions that we can, under the best conditions that we can generate together. So there's nothing as idealistic as this on the Palestinian side. In that, you're exactly right. But there is a sense of sort of practical, perhaps resigned, but ready to make some kind of an accommodation. Yeah, Erica.
If I'm remembering my Jewish history correctly, the Israelis are descendants of Abraham, and the Arabs are descendants of Ishmael.
Abraham too. Ishmael's
Okay,
Abraham's
so-
son. So
right.
they're all
So
your cousins.
okay, so
This is mishpacha.
okay, so
Only mishpacha would fight like this.
okay,
You don't fight like this with strangers.
okay, but I guess my point is, if they're both sons of Abraham,
Yeah,
who came back to bury their father so many centuries ago,
yeah.
then why isn't there more of a sense of being able to see the other's narrative?
Because each side has been deeply wounded.
And while I understand that,
Each side is
there
deeply
has
wounded.
to be a way to...
Well, that's what he's trying to do here. That's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to sketch out the steps you need to take if you're going to arrive at a place where you can begin to have some kind of reconciliation. And what he's trying to say, I think, is something very important. Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt are the president's emissaries to that part of the world. And before that, we had other people doing. George Mitchell was there and other people. And for them, the conversation was always territorial in terms of territory, borders, security, water rights, these kinds of things. All about where do you draw the map. And Yossi's saying, that's important. It's not that that's unimportant, but that is a step in making peace that presupposes another step. And this is the other step. You're not going to make peace simply by drawing borders. You're not going to make peace simply by saying, you live here and you live there. You're going to make peace by getting two peoples who were deeply wounded in this conflict to set down their weapons against each other. That's what he says. We have to accept it. We have to share the land conceptually as well as tangibly. That this is a sharing of narrative, not just a dividing of territory. Because if you do what George Mitchell tried to do, if you do what Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt are trying to do today, or what Dennis Ross and Aaron David Miller, there's a whole industry now of American peace negotiators in the Middle East, then what you'll end up with is two warring states divided by a border. And they'll end up back at war again because the border is not going to protect you from the animosity of the other. You see the problem? You're not going to get any kind of real peace until you address the animosity, but the pain we have between each other, the rage we have between each other, right? And that's what he's trying to say. So he's trying to say, let's sketch for each other what has to happen if we ever want to see an end to this conflict. And he talked about that. You accept the other self-definition. That is, Israelis accept the idea that there is a Palestinian people with a claim on this land. And Arabs have to accept the idea that there's a Jewish people with a claim on this land. And then you say, look, we're not going to agree about the events that happened in 1948. So let's just agree on the certain kinds that, like Douglas said, what happened. All of it happened, right? There were Jews, Israelis, Zionists, who pushed Arabs out of their villages and stole their land. Yes, that happens in war. And there were Arab armies who came to slaughter the Jews only a few years after the Holocaust, and promised the Arabs that they would inherit all the Jews' land, and that's why some of the refugees left. All of that happened. Let's acknowledge all of it. And now, let's see if we can find a way to say, you live there and I live here, and I don't have to hate you anymore. Because I recognize that you have a claim, and you recognize that I have a claim. And in that, as you said before, we share something, not just our patrimony, not just from coming from Abraham, but we share a common love of this land. But that's what it takes. And all of you are right. There are so many ways to undermine this, and so many reasons it's not going to work, and so many dodges, and somebody says, but what about, yeah, great. You got to decide at what point you're going to let the past stop defining the future. And that's really what he's trying to say, okay? Someone had a question over here, yeah.
Isn't this an issue? I mean, there's certainly divergent narratives and prejudices.
Imagine that.
But isn't this ultimately a question of leadership? Arguably, we've got leadership on our end of the division there. But it seems to me that the second somebody that talks peace over there, you get the angry threats and
So the question is, this is really ultimately not just about narratives, but about leadership. Because it takes a certain quality of leadership and a certain courageous leadership to lead people outside of their place where they are comfortable and passionate and right to a place where they can actually move the situation and change the situation, right? And right now you don't have that kind of leadership on either side. Neither side. And, the Israelis have a much more developed system of political leadership than the Palestinians do, right? But the Israeli leadership is not interested in making peace right now. The Israeli leadership is more interested in grabbing as much of the country as they can. And because of Trump, and because of the evangelicals, they're simply not interested in anyone who has a different point of view, right? And the Palestinian leadership is terrified because the only legitimacy the Palestinian leadership has, the only way that they stay in power, is by feeding the rage and resentment of the Palestinian people. And if the Palestinian leadership were to wake up tomorrow, as Douglas pointed out, and say, all right, you know what we've been telling you all these last 75 years, it's all wrong, that person has like a week to live, if that much. They have a nasty way of succession, right? It's sort of the mafia's way of succession, So this is a problem. So that's why you missed the beginning, which was absolutely stunning. The beginning this is a very hopeful book, and in that it becomes a very rare book because most of our conversations about Arabs and Israelis, Palestinians and Israelis is about rage and about why I'm right and about our passions. But it's not about hope. There's very little hope. So this guy writes this little teeny book, which is just filled with hope, right? And everybody attacks it. The reviews have been brutal of this book, just brutal, because everybody tells him why he's wrong. But every review that tells him why he's wrong is exactly why he's right, because all the reviews come from that place of, but I'm right, Yes, and if you're right, you'll never have peace. Decide what you'd rather have. I don't know how many of you live in Jewish families. But in Jewish families, you have to make up your mind. Do you want to live together or do you want to be right? Right? I don't know. There's a thing in Jewish families, at least in mine, maybe not in yours, because you all live in peaceful, sweet, loving families. But in mine, there's a thing called spite. Right? And spite is, I'll show you that I'm right. I'll kill all of us. And that really is, and that really is what's going. You get this, and it comes from what we talked about a moment ago. That both sides are so wounded. There's so much pain. That you can't get past it in order to have any kind of reconciliation. Right? Right? Yes, please. Hang on just a second. We got a microphone so I can hear you and the people online can hear
I
you.
lived in Germany, and
Yeah.
I was a student, and I lived with Palestinian.
Uh-huh.
I am Persian, but I
Yeah.
am Jew. They didn't know that I am Jew. We lived about 6 years together. We were eating, learning. We were together from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at the night together.
Yeah.
After 6 years, they found out, I don't know how, that I'm Jew.
It might have
That-
been the tallis and tefillin.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
And then there was blood on the door of my apartment.
Yeah.
And then I went I thought after 6, 7 years, when no, then
Yeah.
they recognized that there is no difference here. Yes,
Yeah.
maybe that is a Jew from Persian and not from, let's say, Germany or from somewhere else.
Right.
But no. And I talked to the police in Karlsruhe in Germany. They said you had to get out of here because in the night maybe they throw something in your room, and finished.
No, listen, I was just 3 days ago, I was in London. And I don't wear a kippah in London. I wear a baseball cap. Because if you wear a kippah in London, certain neighborhoods of London, you won't get out alive, even in broad daylight. I mean, at least that's the feeling you get. Because there is such rage and such anger and such, destructive passions at work here. So let's finish this. If you go to the second page here, the second to the last source. So what Yossi is going to say is, look, the only way that we can do this is to recognize that both sides have a claim to this land. It's not about giving up my claim to the land. As a Jew, the territory of the West Bank, what's called Judea and Samaria, is holy ground. It includes the cities of Nablus, which is Shechem in the Bible, and it includes the city of Hebron, which is one of the sacred cities of the Jewish people. And, you can't go anywhere in the West Bank without bumping into the Torah, because that's where it all took place. And that's the land that we're ultimately, if we're going to have peace, have to give up. And similarly, Palestinians. I mean, one of the parts of Palestinian identity is that to this day, Palestinian children wear a chain around their neck with a key. And the key is to the door of the house that they left in 1948. Right? And they have claimed, and those houses are in Jaffa or in Haifa or in Jerusalem. But they're not going back to those houses, and we're not going back to the West Bank. It doesn't mean that we're giving up the right of our claim. We all feel that we have a right to this, and we have a strong sense of connection to those places. But if you're going to have peace, that's where the compromise comes in. So listen carefully. If Jaffa, which is now part of Israel, belongs to you, use the Palestinian, and if Hebron, which is on the West Bank, belongs to me, then we have two options. We can continue fighting for another 100 years in the hope that one side or the other will prevail. Or we can accept the solution that's been on the table almost since the conflict began and divide the land between us. In accepting partition, that's dividing the land, we are not betraying our histories, neighbor. We are conceding that history has given us no real choice. Neither side can relinquish its emotional claim to territorial wholeness. Yet, not every claim must be implemented in full. The state of Israel cannot be identified with the land of Israel. The state of Palestine with the land of Palestine. Each people will exercise national sovereignty in only part of its land. We need to separate the abstract justness of the entire claim from the practical injustice of its fulfillment. I'll explain that in a minute. For the sake of allowing the other side to achieve some measure of justice, each side needs to impose on itself some measure of injustice. Do we have a right to the West Bank? Of course we do. It's Jewish land. It's been Jewish land for 3,500 years. Do Palestinians have a right to the land that Israel sits on? Yes, of course. Why? They've been there for 700 years. Now, given that, we have two choices. We can either go on killing each other, or we can stop and say, this is silly. We have to figure out a way to live together. And in living together, what that means is I don't give up what I know is right, my right to that land, but I realize that the only way that we're going to live together, if I want the higher goal of peace, I have to give up the other goal of the whole land. You can't have peace and the whole land. You can't have peace and the whole land. You can't have peace and be right. You have to decide which one's more important to you. And every time you say, but I'm right, yes, of course you are, and you'll be dead. Because each side has weapons. And the weapons are getting more and more lethal. They're getting more and more lethal. So what do? This line is very interesting. It's a very difficult line, but you can read it carefully once again, right? Right? We need to separate the abstract justness, that means the rightness, of the entire claim from the practical injustice of its fulfillment. If I take the whole land, that means I consign the Palestinians to homelessness. Either I kick them out of the land, or I govern them and they have no political rights. Or if the Palestinians take the whole land, either they kick the Jews out, they push us into the sea, or they consign us to a life without political rights. Neither one of those works. Neither one of those works, because you're not going to have peace. The only way that this is going to work is if I say, this is my land and I love it, but I'm going to give it up because I want peace. Right? That's the only way it's going to work. Now, again, you can tell me 100 reasons why this won't work. But if ever you wanted it to work, this is how it has to work. He's not telling you what's going to happen. He tells you what should happen. Okay? And this is the only way that it's going to work. And this is he's writing this, number one, because he sees his Palestinian neighbor just next door. And number two, because he has children who live there. And number three, because he's a Jew who believes in the land of Israel. And we all have, in that sense, we all have children who live there. And at some point you have to say, when do we get the peace that we ask for? Right? I gave a sermon once, you probably slept through it, where I said, the current situation, the state of Israel, is God's, in a certain way, it's a really, really bad joke. You have a people that prayed for sovereignty and power for 3,000 years, and God finally gave it to us. And gave it to us in the worst neighborhood in the world. And gave it to us, and took a people that had been powerless and pushed around and exiled and homeless for all these thousands of years, and put us in a condition where we now have control of the lives of another people that's powerless and homeless and pushed around. Right? So I said to you, don't go to Hawaii, because you'll become an atheist. Because you'll do what I did. You'll stand on Maui Mountain and you'll look out to heaven and you'll say, Rabbi Shalala, master of the world. You knew about this place? And you put us where? If God had put us in the Hawaiian Islands, right? So no one would bother us. It had been very nice,
He didn't know about it. It
Oh, no. Sure he did. And there could have been Oahu, Lanai, Kauai, Lanai, and Alavai, the Jewish island, right? That's my Jewish dream. But you see, the irony is that you live in a land and suddenly you find yourself on the other end of the rifle. And this becomes the sort of irony of the fact of the state of Israel. It's sort of a test, if you will, of our ethics. So Yossi is trying to give us a little hope, because he's trying to say, it's possible to begin, not with governments, but with neighbors. It's possible to begin not with territorial compromises and maps with green lines, but with people. And to say that, listen, tell me your story and I'll tell you mine. And slowly, step by step, we might actually be able to reconcile in some kind of little way. All right, let's get a few more comments, and then it is almost time for ice cream. Yes?
Israel means struggle, so Jews struggle with a lot of things. Islam means submission. And I'd like to know how many mosques would have their imams standing in front of their congregations talking about what you're talking about tonight. And then, you know, it's a culture of honor and revenge, and the Arabic culture is very honor-based.
Yeah, but
that.
you
and
know,
it's very hard for them to
Marcia,
do
you know,
what
I
we
don't
do.
want to. First of all, I don't like to comment on other people's faith.
No, but I'm just
I
saying
will
that
tell you that
we can sit and we can
there's a lot of-
say yes, we're willing to listen and think
Good.
in another way.
You're
Are
much-
they willing? I'm agreeing with Douglas. Are they willing to do the same?
And there are a lot. Wait, hang on. Shh. Let's talk about our own. There's a lot of nasty Jews in the world. No, come on. There are a lot of synagogues that are also full of rage, passion, power. You know, let's not talk about them. Let's talk about us. Look, this is ultimately a book written in English and in Hebrew. He wrote it in Arabic, so they'd hear it. But really, he's also writing for us. He's writing for his own kids. Right? Let's take care of our own rage. There's a lot of rage in the Jewish people. A lot of rage in the Jewish people, right? I mean, I can show you how much rage the Jewish people have if I just said a few sentences, right? But there's such rage, you know, because we've been hurt, we've been wounded, and anyone who gets close to that wound, bam, we react with a lot of pain, a lot of rage. Let's deal with that issue, and let the Muslim community deal with its issues, okay? That's my feeling. You're not wrong. You're not wrong, but I really don't think it's our place to tell another faith community how it should change and grow. But I think we ought to deal with our own. We ought to do our own tshuva. It's just the season of tshuva. It's Elul. And our tshuva should be, we should be more open, more gracious, more listening, right? Even within the Jewish population, right? Even within the Jewish population. No. I wish you were right. Unfortunately, I think especially on these issues, because the wounds are so deep, it's very hard for me to talk about Israeli-Arab politics without people yelling at me, right? And you know, this is what happens because I hear in the yelling not careful, considered political discourse, but rather emotional responses, because we're touching on these wounds. And that's deep inside of us. That's my only comment. Yeah, Jerry.
I read the book.
Good.
And
You get points.
I just want to make really kind of a minor suggestion, but for those who are interested, there's sort of a companion book that I thought was helpful to me.
What was that?
It's called Old Historians, New Historians, No Historians by a Hebrew University historian who's writing on Benny Morris and so on. But at the end, he deals with these narrative issues and the reality of how the so-called Israeli Arabs also feel. He relates it back to 48 and then also comes back with the notion of that we have to share the land between here and the Jordan, and the Palestinians have to figure out some way of organizing themselves so that they have a Palestinian state in maybe Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza, and that we have to have some reality that everyone can live wherever they want to, but they may not be citizens there. Any case, I thought it was an interesting, maybe practical look, but it was also, we can go through these histories endlessly, and at some point, we need to try to figure out how to go forward constructively.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good comment. Thank you. What's the name? Old Historians, New Historians, No Historians.
Yes, by Raphael Israeli.
Raphael, good name, Raphael Israeli. It was probably Yushkovitz in the old country. Yeah. He came from Fez, even better. Good. Any last comments and questions? Let me wish everybody a happy, healthy, and sweet New Year, Shana Tova. Next Saturday night is Slichot. We welcome Professor Sarah Stein from UCLA to talk about Sephardic culture, and then a beautiful musical tradition of the Sephardic community, our Slichot. And then not this coming Wednesday, is it this coming? No, a week from Wednesday night, with Rabbi Borowitz talking about tshuva, the process of becoming whole. So, Shana Tova, happy, healthy New Year, and Shabbat Shalom.